Hello there. Welcome again. Been a couple weeks, but we're back talking about something that's of interest to all three of us and probably of interest to you again, which is AI. It's been a couple weeks, and there's been some pretty major things that have happened in generally in the U.S. and global markets, but also in my specific sphere in technology. There's been a specific article and some feedback on it that's been quite interesting. So I thought we'd dive into that, as well as how it impacts, small medium businesses, especially in Canada, because we're kind of we're not really involved in the AI space. We don't have any major frontier model companies building here. We've got Cohere, which is a great success story in and of itself, but um, not on the world stage quite yet. So we'll see where that goes. But the first one of multiple major events in the markets was the release of tools specifically from Anthropic, specifically focused on business users. So this was a suite of plugins that are really what they're sort of targeting is they're going after, in their words, five specific industry verticals with their tools, and they're going to try and hyper focus on how to best automate or centralize AI within those industries. And the first couple first use cases that they mentioned, one of which was legal, again, trying to automate and utilize AI in multitude of different legal practices. Obviously, legal is a pretty broad, wide ranging industry in and of itself. But if you look at everything from conveyancing to litigation, a lot of it is drafting contracts for corporate law, memorandums, all that kind of stuff. So what was quite interesting as well is essentially the overtures that AI is really coming for pre-existing tools or pre-existing industry verticals, and there was a massive sell-off in first off for software stocks, so SaaS companies, the Salesforces and SAPs of the world, essentially, anticipating that because it's disrupting coding and it's disrupting the ability of companies to essentially generate their own software. Are we going to have these mega software companies that are selling, in many cases, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of software licenses per year? So that's an open question. And then subsequently, closer to home for us, there was an announcement that OpenAI had partnered with an insurance broker out of Europe, and essentially, from my understanding, sort of like a back-end API provider plugging into insurance companies. And a bunch of the major public insurance brokerage companies dropped in trading, somewhere up to 20% in some of them. Again, an indication that the investor, the appetite is really concerned about what AI, what is this signifying in terms of what AI is going to do for these industries. That dovetailed with an article that was published on X by Matt Schumer, and it's called "Something Big Is Happening." I can link to it in the show notes. And it is a very thought-provoking article. It's received quite a bit of criticism for being a little bit obviously catering to a certain tech-focused or AI-centric audience, and potentially tapping into the hype and the excitement around AI. So we'll address that, but essentially, there's been to summarize the article for our purposes, it really draws sort of three main ideas. The first is that the models that the software and the technology community are starting to see, the frontier models, specifically from Anthropic called Opus 4.6, and from OpenAI, ChatGPT or GPT 5.3, are just exponentially better than anything that's ever been released. And he has a couple examples, essentially things that AI was not able to do a year ago, and people were laughing at it for even hinting that it could be done, is now actually achievable.
I'd love to know what those things are.
Yeah, and having used these models, I think for specific use cases, he's correct. I think they still have a long way to go in other applications, but I think the sentiment is actually correct that the slope of improvement and exponential growth that these frontier companies are able to accomplish in months is really foreboding for where this technology is going to go. The second thing that he talks about is essentially the level of disruption that is likely to happen, and the fact that for most people they don't really see it. And I think this is where he received a lot of his criticism, and I think some of it is valid. And we can talk about this. And really, it comes down to there's only really one major industry that's really utilizing AI today in production, and that is software. That is developing software products and the ability for these AI models to write code. Whereas other industries, again, we just talked about, insurance, law, accounting, finance, banking, it's far more muted. And you look at, let's say, more primary industries, oil and gas development, manufacturing, utility companies, stuff like that. It's really difficult to see exactly how these sorts of tools could potentially disrupt those business models or staffing within them. But anyways, he makes a very valid point that, as these tools get to a critical mass and a tipping point where they're able to do a lot of these jobs, it's inevitable that a large number of companies in any industry are going to start to choose these tools over people. And it's quite foreboding to see where that might go. And then the final piece is, again, what can we do about it? And specifically from the perspective of somebody that's within the workforce, and we can apply that to small business owners, entrepreneurs today, as well as people that are younger, that are potentially in their first job or about to enter the workforce and looking for a job. What are the things that that he suggests that we do, and we can talk about that in a bit more detail. But let's just get your guys' thoughts. Michael, what based on what you've seen and the sort of the themes of the article, where is your head at, and where do you see this going?
Well, it's definitely a lot to digest there. But yeah, I think tying it back to businesses and individuals, I think AI is not necessarily the threat. What the threat is businesses, competitors that are using AI. So if you think about it, that's going to be the biggest risk to most business owners when they're competing with other businesses that have adopted AI and are utilizing to drive meaningful impact to their organization. I'm not talking about, everyone, I wouldn't say everyone, but a strong majority of users now, businesses and individuals, are using AI to write emails, to generate content, to oversee admin knowledge as well, for knowledge. But once these businesses start taking AI, embedding it in their business and taking it to the next level and using it in such a way that drives meaningful impact to, client acquisition, client retention, costs, driving expenses down. They're driving expenses down by reducing the amount of bodies, less errors, and revenue growth. It's going to be very difficult to compete with organizations like this. So that's where I see this going. I see things evolving where, every business is going to be forced to have tech. And I wouldn't say tech, a lot of companies now have tech as part of their business, but it's more of an afterthought. Andrew and I speak to this at lengths. You can have a business and say, hey, and we see this all the time, we're going to invest in tech. Okay, great. We're going to invest in technology. A lot of businesses are doing that. However, it's a mind shift change where, and we attended a really great seminar by Michael Hinton, and he talked about in I think it was 5 to 10 years, every company is going to be a technology company. Just about every company. So there's going to be some level of technology embedded into that company. Whatever it's doing, at its core, it's going to have to be powered by technology. And if it's not, he talked about this self-selection, how these other companies that don't adapt and adopt are not going to be able to thrive in this environment like that. I don't know if that's true or not, but it definitely, there is a strong argument. There is a strong argument, especially with how these models are coming along and how proficient they're getting at doing things. And with the coding getting to where it's getting, soon it's going to be very accessible to businesses to bring this into their organization and really use it to drive meaningful impact. Andrew, what do you think?
Yeah, I think essentially it's just one of those things where businesses has to evolve. They have to start thinking about things differently, right? Like you said, Mike, they can't think of technology as an afterthought anymore. It really has to be something at the forefront. And they really have to kind of come up with a solid business strategy. And I think all businesses out there, especially those white collar businesses, they really need to start thinking about when is this disruption going to happen, right? Like, is it 1 year, 2 year, or 3 years, right? Like, it will happen, but it's just a matter of time. So I think it's even more critical for businesses to evolve, and like you've said, Mike, they for them to evolve to be more like tech companies, right? Like to be operating like tech companies, where they need to start thinking about not so much about who I can hire and who I can put in certain positions, and not focus so much on the organizational structure, but to start thinking about the business as a series of processes, right? So once they start to understand that and they start to build these workflows, it's going to position them to be in a better to better position them for AI, because then they can utilize the those efficiency gain from AI to start building in these workflows, these summaries, and all that stuff to drive growth, right?
And
So
Andrew, would that kill just and now? I agree. Would that kill entry level jobs once we get to that point, like an SDR, a junior analyst, a marketing coordinator, someone in customer service? What's going to happen to those entry level jobs? Are they just gone? They're gone, I assume.
I think it's not going to be so much of these jobs disappearing, but I think the rate of hiring these individuals are going to slow down, right? Like, if you have them, they'll probably be repurposed for some kind of human in the loop, where in our type of businesses where insurance and coverages and everything matters so much, that becomes important for us to have oversight. So have human in this loop of decisions, right? So they're gonna, I guess their roles are gonna get repurposed to be more like oversight and doing those handling those exceptional cases that are outside of the workflow, right? Rather than having them do those mundane data entry type tasks, right? And like I said, build those workflows. I think that's very important. And having data, having clean data is going to be very important to position yourself for AI, right? Because you don't have clean data in your system, or you don't have access to your data, or you don't have ownership of your data. That's going to position you to be in a position where you cannot utilize the efficiency gained from AI, and that's going to put you at a huge disadvantage. So rebuilding roles and really thinking about, like the whole talent now, like basically all these talents are going to have to get repurposed, right? It's going to
Yeah,
be
that's what I was going to say, and maybe Kyle, you can weigh in on this. So I'm just going to throw out a random number, but say there's 500,000, job entrants coming into the job market in a particular year. There could be 500,000 people coming out of colleges, universities, entering the job market. Typically, a lot of those jobs would be purposed towards, these positions that now are, compressed. Now, instead of having, hundreds of thousands of, analysts or marketers, now there's very few, because one person with AI can do so much more in the loop. So what happens, Kyle, to all those additional bodies? Do they all have to repurpose? Is there enough jobs for that repurposing? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think it's important. We've talked about this before, and I think generally speaking, the youth unemployment rate is not spoken about enough. I think youth unemployment is a huge predicting indicator for the health of an economy, because essentially you're investing in future growth when you're looking at your younger generations. And across the country right now, youth unemployment is at roughly 15%. In this province in Alberta, I think it's about 10%, which they're not terrible numbers. Like if you're looking at like peak financial crisis, obviously it's up into the 20s. Certain countries, like I think China, has youth unemployment above 20% right now. It's a huge issue. It's a big challenge. I think the problem that we have is that's indicative. It's a bit of a proxy for how businesses are spending, both for what you're alluding to, which is if a business is spending their money on technology that replaces or can replace an entry-level employee, then obviously that employee doesn't have that job. The other thing that we've talked about that I think is actually probably more tangible today is that when you bring in a lot of unskilled immigration, that immigration takes those jobs. And so we've seen a lot of downward pressure in entry-level positions from, wage pressure. So essentially people are coming in and they're competing with youth, teenagers, people that are just graduating university for those entry level jobs. And they're getting them because ostensibly they're better qualified, they've got more experience, and they're willing to take those lower wages because there's so much competition for those jobs. So I think, absent this AI discussion, I think it's a problem already. And I don't think it's fair to sort of point the finger on AI, even though I do think that AI will have an impact. But there's no question that there's a substantial issue going on right now pre-AI. Now, to answer your question, I do think that those are going to be the first jobs to go, because typically they're repetitive, they're admin focused, they don't require a lot of skill. They're often not involving any sort of client interaction. They're not, there's no major responsibility with regard to, large sums of money, expensive equipment, that kind of stuff. Like, it's going to be relatively straightforward to automate that. The sales role, we've seen some voice models come out. 11 Labs just recently this week released a voice model that's intended for sales SDR type roles. And the latency is essentially zero. Like, it's absolutely indistinguishable from a well-trained, highly qualified, sales or customer service rep on the phone. So I don't doubt for a second that that's going to be it already is having a massive impact in a lot of those roles. The other one that is very tangible that I've seen firsthand is developers, because again, if the models can write code or frankly produce any type of work product, knowledge-based work product that is as good, if not better, than a junior in that role, the company is going to use the model every day of the week. And we're already seeing major, the large, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, reduce or cut, tens of thousands of jobs, significant amounts of labor at the lower end of some of these more, again, administrative, reviewing, code, version changes, stuff like this. That's fairly unsophisticated. And models are able to do it, especially with agents now, are able to do it significantly faster and cheaper. So I do think it's coming, but I do think it's also important to remember what's the starting point here.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting. I just think about, back to this cutting of the jobs. Like, I just think about think of like a 10-person organization in 5 years. Like, in 5 years, what can a 10-person organization achieve? It obviously depends on what kind of vertical you're in, but like going to white collar, imagine how productive they can be if they have technology embedded in their organization. 10 people, hypercharged.
Yeah. Well, there's examples right now, again, of people running multiple, and it depends on the setup. So one thing that I would try and bring us back to reality and talking about this is, if we think about the level of adoption of technologies today. So pre-AI, one of the things that I always found really interesting being in the technology space is the number of entities, large corporates, even medium-sized companies that really, they're still running like Windows 95. They've got their sort of basic technical software suite, but there's really no appetite, there's no interest, there's no investment in experimentation. Like, if you compare sort of the average business and the level of technology adoption and investment to the sort of stuff that you see in the startup world in places like, Silicon Valley, even Texas, some parts of the US, it's a different planet. Like, it's unbelievable, having been in the sort of technology sphere, the level of tooling and, software and libraries and packages and things that enable you to be more productive, go to market products, outbound sales, inbound sales, all that kind of stuff, that right now, vast majority of medium to large enterprises are still doing the same thing that they were doing maybe 25 years ago. Apart from maybe implementing Salesforce, and that's partially why Salesforce has been so successful, is they've tapped into that really slow moving, needs to be very secure, needs to be bulletproof. It's not intended to be glamorous. It's just sort of really, really small incremental changes. But again, it's not, none of these companies are setting the world alight in their technology stacks and the level of risk they're taking. So why do we now think that AI, being extremely high risk, unproven, it changes frankly week to week sometimes, like there's absolutely I don't think there's going to be enough appetite to really implement these tools at scale to disrupt, beyond, let's say, what we've just been talking about. So some of these entry level roles, admin roles, automation's fine. Where the work needs to be deterministic, the models really, it has a certain ceiling, I think. So, you know, yeah. Anyways, I definitely think that the models will get there. We're just not there yet. And I
Would you
think that's
debate
one thing
that,
that this
Andrew?
article.
Would you debate that?
I I think I disagree with the model not being there yet. Like I think the model will evolve very fast. And I think essentially it will be exponential in terms of how these models develop, right? Like we can see already the for example the Will Smith videos, from what it is just a few years ago to now, where you see some of the model that are coming out of China, C Dance 2, they can make full-fledged movies out of it, Hollywood movies. So now it just from something that where people were saying, hey, it won't disrupt Hollywood, to now I think it has a very real possible chance of disrupting Hollywood,
So
right?
here's the question, and this is a good case study. So I think if we draw the correlation with Hollywood, I think there's going to be this divergence, because we've heard from companies like Netflix where there's a lot of pressure on production budgets and spending and stuff like that. Like there's going to be certain companies that continue to make movies the old-fashioned way. Writers, like human writers, human producers, human directors, the whole nine yards. There's also going to be upstarts that don't have the same sort of political and brand pressure from switching from the conventional way of hiring people, especially because most of Hollywood is all union driven, right? So there's a lot of union pressure for a lot of these existing companies that have contracts and so forth. Whereas if you're a startup, you don't have any of that legacy political debt.
And that's
And so you're able to start up and essentially start making movies with a small team of technologists, like you're saying.
yep.
The question is though, do you think that the appetite from the public is going to be enough, or will they not care, where they're going to say, hey, I'm happy to watch an AI film or a conventional film?
I think it's just the at the end of the day, the that those adoptions are really just I guess a limitation around workflow, trust, and maybe some liability or something, if there's any liability that can come out of it. But for something like Hollywood,
Mhm.
I can confidently say now, seeing some of the development out there, that within a couple years you won't be able to tell the difference between whether this is someone real acting, or if it's going to be someone like some AI video that's being generated, right? Like you're not going to be able to tell the difference. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I
you
think
know,
it's an adoption thing too. Yeah, so that's one part for sure. One part is, when the quality gets there, it gets to a point where you can hardly differentiate. Andrew's right. The other thing is just the adoption of technology over time. It's only a matter of time before that becomes the norm and people are just become accustomed to it. In the beginning, there's going to be lots of resistance. I agree. Like with anything, with any major transition that's happened, in the first the first little while, maybe 1 to 2 years, there's going to be like a real big separation where it's like, hey, I want the authentic original way. And then there's going to be some people that are okay with going with the new way, these new films created by AI, but that camp is going to shrink smaller and smaller, the individuals that want it the old school way. And eventually, as new generations come in and kids and people just get used to that way of life, we can't escape it. AI is in everything now. Everything, every email I open up, I get calls, AI, emails, LinkedIn, everything's AI. It's only a matter of time before it's going to be in the movies as well. And then I think people are just going to adopt it at that point.
So do you think that there's also going to be a bit of a pushback because there's so much slop? Because that's actually another point that I would touch on, is like, I think we're in the novelty phase right now. And when we start getting, let's say 50 texts a day and 50 calls a day, and, our inbox spam filter doesn't do its job well enough, and we're getting hundreds of emails that are they're just all AI generated slop. Like,
I
it's
definitely
interesting.
miss authenticity. Yes. I do. I am starting to miss authenticity. Now, if I see an email or a message that's been written, or a plan that's been written by someone who authentically tried to do it, I appreciate that. The issue is the quality of work. It's tough because on one hand, it's like, oh, this is great. That someone actually put this together. It's real. If it's a little message, it's one thing. But if you're doing something of impact or something, something really important, like a study or a report, It makes no sense to do that manually because you'll never be able to do it as efficient as the AI. But I don't know, Andrew, this would be a good one for you to weigh in on. But I do like the authenticity, but at the same time, it's our standard of quality is so high right now.
Yes, and that's the issue is that listen, we essentially went from bank tellers. What's interesting with millennials that we went from bank tellers where we had to wait in line to having the bank right in our pocket on these small devices. So
ATM, automated teller machine. Like it wasn't even a conversation when we
there
were growing
wasn't,
up.
yeah. So it evolved to now from ATM to having this directly on your phone, right, where you can bank from anywhere around the world. So, I think you kind of nailed it there, Mike. Even though you like some people, like I'd say probably like my parents, they love to go to the bank and meet the bank teller and have a conversation in person. But you know what? That business is dwindling, and it's now people like at least our age when we grow up, we demand this like speed that is impossible. So imagine waiting in line. It's like, yeah, you know what? I'll just go to the ATM. But now even better, you know what? I'll just do banking on my phone. The demand for speed and all those things is just unrealistic.
Efficiency and
It just makes it difficult for us to go back to the old ways of doing things anymore. So I think that, what's interesting is that, this is gonna, like we were talking a lot about how jobs are gonna disappear. I think there's gonna be a lot of time that's gonna get freed up from all this AI that's being utilized, right? Like there's gonna free up a lot of time for a lot of people. And I think it's gonna be a huge opportunity there in that how are you gonna use this free time? What are you going to do with this free time, right? How are you going to, utilize this time to generate value that are beyond what AI is generating? That's going to be pretty interesting, right? Maybe do something like hands-on, maybe do some physical things, and we talk a lot about white collar, but I'm going to bring it to the blue collars. Like I think as much as we talk about, white collar jobs are being endangered, there's a ton of blue collar jobs out there that I think are not being discussed, right? And a lot of those things could be the invoicing, the estimating, all that stuff, all the office white collar jobs surrounding the blue collar, operations. And we're very close to having self-driving cars, fully self-driving cars. All those jobs that are truck drivers, delivery drivers, all of those are going to be gone. Warehousing, dispatch, like all that stuff, scheduling for delivery, all that's going to
Mhm.
disappear too. Quality inspection, we're talking about QA, like QA of products, that's going to be gone too. Like these are blue collar jobs that nobody really discuss about, but they're also in danger of being gone. It's now Yeah, so that's why I'm saying, like, I think the AI disruption, the models are evolving so fast that it's not a matter of how, the model is available for us to use, but it's how fast we can adopt these models.
Yeah.
So I
So
think
let's
that,
bring it home. So I agree with you that there's going to be a lot of disruption. It'll be interesting to see how quickly it moves and how widespread. But I want to come back to Matt's article where he talks about what to do and his advice for us and for the younger generation. We've got some of us as kids as well. Essentially, he touches on three main things. So the first one is be prepared for change. So this is more directed at younger people. Essentially saying again, like if you're struggling to get a job, spend your time trying to learn the tools, understanding what the new this sort of new world looks like, and be adaptable. Like be prepared to abandon whatever it is that you studied, and if it's if it doesn't look like it's going to be around in the next 20 years, then don't expect to get some handout from the industry when it starts to transform itself. The other one I especially liked is more focused on again, us small business owners, people in positions currently, whether they're rank and file or management, and essentially anticipate, don't be afraid of the future, but essentially be prepared that the future is going to change. There's things that are going to change that are going to negatively affect you. And he has similar advice for them, which is essentially, learn to understand what these tools do. Even if you spend just an hour a day reading about it, playing around with them, do that, make that investment in your future so that you're not blindsided by this. Because he said the real concern isn't the people that are left behind that know how these tools work. It's going to be the people that are totally blindsided and they have absolutely no way to adapt. And there's not going to be an entry back, a road or a path back into that, economic vertical or business if they just don't know how the new way of doing business works. And part and parcel of that is, he said, stop just using them for basic search queries and actually think deeply about, like, what do I do in my job and how can I really push these models and understand what they can and can't do? Give them, for example, the ability to draft a legal brief if you're a lawyer, or contracts, or reviewing your financials, outputting, real tangible work, rather than just using it as a Google replacement to, aggregate a bunch of sources. So I thought that was really good. And on the, learning about it piece, again, try and insert it into your existing workflow. There's going to be a lot of barriers, especially large enterprises, that are essentially saying you're not allowed to use these tools because we don't have data security. And that's a very, very valid concern. But if there's a way to use this in sandboxes, try and push it internally, try and understand the tools and be that sort of technology leader in your own sphere, just so understand how it works and get to know it better. So what are your thoughts about that? And I guess from personal experience, what's worked for you, what hasn't? What do you guys think that people should take away from that sort of, the future's coming sooner than you realized?
It's difficult because we haven't really had to go through that. This is, when we entered the job market, it was very different. It was it was based on skills, based on merit, based on doing things a certain way as they were done before. So it's very different. I definitely have sympathy for individuals, the young folks that are entering the job market now. Where would you start? I think you gave some good feedback there, Kyle. I don't know. Is there anything you would want to add to that, Andrew?
Yeah, I think I guess for
I don't know where I would start if I had to start over again.
For young people, I think it's both, it's obviously, scary, but it's also a very exciting opportunity. And I say this to my brother-in-law all the time. It's like, you're growing up in an era where you have access to this AI, you have access to this genius that's sitting in your pocket, 24/7. I didn't have access to that, right? Like,
The problem is, Andrew, everyone has access to that genius. So I
and
guess it's how you use it.
that's exactly it. It's how you use these things. This is very key. You have access. That's the key. Is that now information is traveling significantly faster from the from your phone to what you're reading, right? Back then, I had to search. I had to search through tons of search links through Google. I had to search. I spent hours searching for like an answer or how to solve a problem. But now the problem, I can resolve the problem significantly fast through the
So
use
how
of
do you
AI.
find those key problems then that he should be
So,
solving? What are you telling them to solve?
yeah, like I think what do you mean, like the problem, like finding problems to solve?
Hmm.
Like
Are there
you can find,
opportunities there? Like if you're saying, because everyone has access to this tool, how they use it is the key. And I think that's, you mentioned that back then you used to have, if you were creative enough and you had a problem and you wanted to solve it, you would do your research. But now you have AI, you could solve it so much quicker. But so can others if they can think about the same
I
problem that you're trying to solve. So
I
how do
think
you where do you get the jump?
so. Listen, like we're not all born equal, right? Like I think that's the key thing, is that not everybody is equal in terms of how we ingest information, right? Like that's why there's students who are grade A students, there are B students, right? Like that's very normal. And I think it's just now that you have this access, and this is what I said to him, is that if you have the ability to learn, all of the stuff in first year, you know, or if you're really smart, you can probably learn this when you're 10 years old, right? If you're, like you have access to learn at a much faster pace than when I grew up, right? Like where I had to follow a curriculum, I had to follow this, the pace of the education system, but now they can break free out of that. Right, they can learn from AI, right? Like and AI probably teach better. And what's funny is that he told me an interesting story. Is that sometimes it's really confusing to hear a professor speak, because their focus is not teaching. Their focus is really on research, and they're just teaching on the side. So he takes a lecture, pumps into AI, and have AI explain all these concepts to him, in his way of understanding. So all this education is now being tailored to him. Kids, they can grow up smarter if they can utilize this tool to learn faster. And I think it's now, I would have loved that. Like, I can learn so many things so fast. I think it's just a matter of how fast people can learn. So the ones that are smart, right, that can utilize these model, like Kyle said, understand the model, how they work, and understand exactly how to extract the most value and the most information out of these platforms in a way that that works for them. That's the key, right? Like, I've seen so many times when people just use systems and use these AI models and just ask it a question, ask it to do something, right? Like, it's the wrong way to use AI. I think you have to kind of work with it. You have to kind of,
Yeah. I think our next episode, we should dive into that. I think we should dive into, using AI, how to use AI. I think that would be a good episode. Because I'll take the
Yeah,
contrarian belief to you, Andrew. And it's like, yeah, you can learn. You gave an example of learning quicker, but it's also making people lazier. Because there's so much access to information, some individuals don't want to onboard or retain anything because it's they have access to it at their fingertips. So I could just quickly look it up and read it quickly and just apply it in the moment, but not actually retain it because I'm so lazy now. I don't need to. I can come back to this thing at any time and just query it to get my answers. So it makes people lazy. And you're right.
like
People are
Kyle
using
said,
it for the wrong things.
they're using it for
You
the
know?
wrong thing. They're using it as an alternative to search engine, like Kyle's saying, and I completely agree with that. It's not. It shouldn't be used like that. This thing should be used for brainstorming. It should be used for checking your strategy.
Yeah, solving complex problems.
Yeah, testing your solution. Like, these are the kind of things that we can use AI for, and there are huge advantages to these things. And people are using it in these ways that are just, you're right, making them lazier, and they don't want to think, and they're relying on AI to think for them. That's the wrong way to use AI.
Yeah, and it doesn't drive value either. Like like you said, you got to tie it back to value. How can I use AI maybe to solve this problem? And this problem is going to generate value for me. If I solve this problem, but you also have to have go-to-market strategies. You have to have a strategy to monetize or take this to market. You have to have a strategy to benefit from it somehow, whether it's financial, whether it's usually it's financial. Like,
Yeah,
I'll
or
just use the
personal.
financial example.
Yeah, it could be personal as well. It could be like, how can I,
Like my health.
build a health plan. Now you have
Yeah.
access to without
Improve
going
my
to.
relationships.
Yeah, like, can you
true.
translate what my wife's saying to me because I don't seem to understand. Like, well, that kind of stuff,
Well,
right? It's really kind of these are things that people can be creative about and use AI to help them in their day to day. And I agree with Kyle what you're saying. It's not a search engine. It's not an alternative to search engine. It is a tool to essentially helps you think, but you should not replace it with thinking for you, right? Like, you should, because
power up your thinking.
exactly, because AI will give you a tailored answer. And a lot of time, I don't know if you guys notice, they always give you answer that you want to hear. And I've seen people who have given me responses that essentially make no sense because it's really kind of tailored to them, right? It's not tailored to me, and it's submitted to me, but it's tailored to them. So it's not to my standard, for example, right? Like, you got to think of it like that. Yeah. So it's very, very interesting. I agree with you, Kyle.
Yeah, I think the one area that I would push back on is, again, the for young people, I wouldn't worry about competitive advantage. I wouldn't worry about, like, how can I, use the tools differently to other people so that I can stand out from the crowd. I think one thing that I really like a lot of what Mark Andreessen has said on the sort of predictions of where AI is going to take the economy. And one of the things that he says is essentially when we enter this sort of new world of abundance, it's not that, everything is going to be available, so therefore you won't have any value. The reality is everything is going to, like, similar to what you alluded to earlier, Andrew, where you're not going to have all of these constraints and these things that are tying you down from experimenting and for able to try things for the first time. And so I think for younger people, and I would tell my kids this is when they get older is, I think it's a real opportunity to do things that you're really, really interested in, and do as much research as you possibly can. Again, like using it as an education tool, get it to put together an education plan on a specific subject that you need to learn more about or you want to learn more about, that's tangential to your, areas of interest that you already enjoy. And then, just deep dive, get it to do market research, get it to do, reports on stuff, and use that tool as a sort of a tutor to just really double down on stuff that you're really interested in. And I think that inevitably is going to spawn, creative endeavors and ideas of how to potentially, monetize it, whether that's an entrepreneurial endeavor where you're starting a business yourself, or you're going to an existing industry, let's say Hollywood, and you're saying, hey, I really love, I don't know, set design or whatever. And there's ways that you can utilize these tools in potentially novel ways that, add value to people. Because I think the end goal for anybody, whether they're young or old, in any, any role, is it's about adding value to people. And, I think if you can do something that you really enjoy, that comes naturally to you, that doesn't feel like work, and you're able to leverage these tools to do it, better, faster, cheaper, where you're still enjoying it, I think that's really, really critical. One example I came across was, there's a guy that I follow, Jordan Crawford, who has a company called Cannonball Go-to-Market. And it was really interesting because he's connected to a VC firm that we're connected to. And essentially what he said was, stop using AI to generate like outbound slop. Like, don't use AI to just automate the existing garbage that you're doing. Like, there's no passion in it. There's no skill in that. Everybody can click a button and create a bunch more slop with AI. It doesn't help open any doors. And I would encourage everybody to look at it. But the Coles notes of his essentially his strategy is, use it to try and drill down and find information and find people and problems, most specifically problems, pull demand that otherwise you wouldn't be able to find by yourself, or it would take you a huge inordinate amount of time. Leverage the tools to help you do that, and then plug that process into an existing, personable, normal, go-to-market outreach, where you're not just spamming people, but you're using it to actually gather a lot more detail and learning about your customer, getting information at scale that you would never be able to get otherwise. So it's interesting because in hindsight, you look back at it and you're like, well, this is really common sense. But in reality, nobody kind of does that, and nobody approaches it from that angle. And I do think that you don't get to those sort of epiphanies unless you're really passionate about what you're doing and you're looking at how you can use those tools in a novel way to create value. So that's kind of what I would encourage people to do, for sure.
I think that what it does is that it levels the playing field a bit for the young people, right? Like young people that are getting into to any kind of business can really, get sharpen their skill much faster. So, like for me, who was a bit older, I got to really learn AI, and I got to really prepare for this because, these young kids, they can come up, they can have like, essentially 10 different abilities that with AI that I can't compete against, right? Or they have very deep knowledge, or they know how to do things so much faster. Especially like now with vibe coding and everything, they can spin up things so fast. It's crazy. So I think it's the older generation have to be more concerned. The younger generation, they have an advantage. They have that opportunity to really level the playing field. And it's pretty exciting, but at the same time, it's pretty scary because someone who has an idea of a movie or concept of this movie can now create Hollywood budget movies using AI. How crazy is that?
Crazy.
That's pretty wild. And I was extremely impressed seeing some of these footages that are coming out recently. It's incredible.
Impressive. So if we had to summarize it, then and it sounds like the younger generation and everyone, for the fact of the matter, should be using AI, leveraging it to try to solve problems, identify problems, use AI to exponentially increase that ramp to solving that problem, figure out ways you can add value, create value. What else did we say? So we're solving problems, we're creating value, we're learning, using AI to learn something, at a much rapid clip. Experiment, I like that too. That's the other thing we talked about. Gives individuals the ability to experiment with different things. Usually it would take so much longer to become an expert in something that you were committed. There was no going back. Now you have the opportunity to trial and error different things at a much faster pace. So I think that summarizes most of our notes. Anything I missed before we wrap up?
No, that's good. We'll leave it there. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one, guys.